So, Sydney, could you just introduce yourself and give a little background about how you got involved in OM?
Yeah. So my name is Sydney Skybetter. I'm a professor of choreography and emerging technologies here at Brown University. And I got involved in Odyssey of the Mind in maybe the early 90s, early to mid 90s, because it was the place where all of the cool nerds hung out. These were folks that had an interest in performance and interest in emerging technologies. And I don't remember exactly how I got introduced to these folks exactly, but it literally shaped the arc of my weird ass career.
I love it. So, how did it shape your career? How did OM influence either where you went to school or what you did afterwards?
Yeah, well, so I think that the most kind of profound, if internal, kind of measure of that for me was just the awareness that there were other nerds like myself who were interested in technology, interested in STEM, but also interested in creativity and play and performance. That kind of interdisciplinarity. Like I didn't have words for this at the time, but it was like a really specific and narrow band of interests that overlapped in OM. And up until the point when I first got involved in OM, like I just thought I was like this weird kid who would never have friends or like had no like particular future. Like it was just like really hard to imagine either a future for myself or like what it would be to be in community with other similarly or like-minded nerds. And so what I learned from this experience was that like not only are there people locally, regionally, who like share these kinds of values towards play and rigor and excellence and research, but also like there's people all over the place, all over the country, all over the world who have similar values. Like there's a communities of practice here that roll deep, and just like being able to feel part of this community as a gangly weird teenager was it's such a watershed moment because it made me feel like I had a future being myself and doing this work, and that I didn't have to like pretend to be good at sports or to like want to be an accountant or whatever. Like it was okay to be weird and interdisciplinary and look at these thousands of people who are doing it alongside me.
What's an example of, um, I guess, that moment of acceptance or realization that you had while doing OM, whether it was with your teammates or a project that you were working on?
Sure. So I was never the most technology forward person on the group. I worked with a bunch of absolute savants who have now gone on to extremely rigorous technical careers at places like Apple and Dartmouth. Like these are some serious tech nerds. And initially, in the first like year or two of our team, like I was like computer like interested in computers. Like I had like a Mac 2 or whatever, and like knew how to like pirate video games, but like I didn't really know how to code. I didn't know how to solder. I didn't know how to do any of the hardware stuff. And for the first year or so, I was just like, I kind of didn't know what I had to offer. I was just this kid who like had a background in like theater and ballet. But what came to pass was that like as our narrating, as our interest in story as a group elaborated and grew, it became clear that actually my expertise in performance, in choreography specifically, had a shaping effect on all of the things that we ended up doing as a group. And so this was like another kind of watershed moment where it's like, oh, actually, I don't need to be good at the technology because we have like a team full of people who are good at technology. I need to be good at the thing that I'm good at. I need to be attentive to performance and bodies and ethics and emotion because those are my concerns and that's my expertise. And these expertises can be in flow and collaborative relation to one another. And like my expertise does not come at the expense of other people's expertise and vice versa. As an artist, though, principally, that was meaningful to me because like artists, and I'll speak for myself, but this is generalizable. Artists so frequently, so historically, so asymmetrically are positioned as like a supplement to like more rigorous scientific inquiry. Like this is why it's STEM to STEAM, because A for art is a supplement literally to STEM. Like STEM is the structure, the most important structure that the A for the arts is like kind of literally crammed into. Like this is I don't have a whole lot of patience for STEM to STEAM, but in this kind of utopian moment within the OM team, I started having working models for like equitable interdisciplinarity. And this is functionally what I teach now here at Brown. Like, so I teach choreo robotics, which is functionally about making robots dance. But like the people I teach this class with, they're computer scientists, they're roboticists. These are not people with performing arts backgrounds per se. And the only way that this class flies is by our ability to work together and acknowledge and honor each other's respective expertise. These are muscles that I first started practicing in OM in the 90s.
I think your point about when you have people who are specialized, the sum is absolutely better than each of the parts. I remember on my team, we had someone who came in, I think on our usually like our third year together, and she had a background with acting and writing, and really leveled up the whole team. And not only did she contribute that to us, so we could say, Elizabeth, can you write us a really good script? But she also encouraged everyone else to be thinking in that direction.
Totally.
And thinking about, okay, well, what story are we telling here? Or, how should our blocking go to make sure that people can see the cool things that we've
Sure.
built? And by having people who are very different than each other, but able to cooperate, you can create really, really cool things.
Totally. I think that's exactly right. And to take that just like one step further, first, I mean, I don't want to understate the importance in OM creating a frame where that interdisciplinarity is possible or encouraged. I mean, even just how you were talking about like blocking right now, it's like you have to like move people through space and time so that they can the objectives of the performance can be met. And that can only happen in relation to certain kinds of priorities, which are stipulated in the fine print of the assignment, right? Or I don't remember what they're called now, the gameplay doc, but whatever, the rules. But the other kind of finer point there is that like as a function of the rules, the parameters that OM sets, the priorities of the team are set. And so to privilege interdisciplinary collaboration, to privilege and incentivize folks getting, not just like getting along in kind of a superficial way, but actually meaningfully working in relation to each other's expertise. Like that's like 7 layers of infrastructure that incentivizes and privileges collaboration. And like, that's not how the university works, right? Like that's not how Brown works. That's not how most corporate environments I've ever worked in works. But it's nonetheless like this utopian kernel that I've tried to take with me in my work and art life.
Do you have a challenge that you remember overcoming in OM specifically?
Oh God, you're referring to the challenges as like the specific exercises, or a challenge like
a challenge
persevering
more
despite...
broadly. So
Okay.
something in long term that you worked on, and it was an interesting experience. Maybe something crashed and burned. Maybe something was wildly successful. But
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many. So many things that were overcome. I will say that the one of the most important meta skills from OM is to just be unflappable in the face of things literally catching on fire. Like that I have taken with me. I'll say that like the small and the large. On the small side, I remember one of the robots that we built like just stopped working because robots never work. And this is something I now learn, like now I teach professionally. It's like robots never work, especially when you need them to. That is the law, right? That's how that works. But so we had a robot that just flamed out or whatever. And I started, I was like a narrator in the performance or whatever. And I started trying to make like rhyming couplets articulating the failure of the robot as my teammate Dan was trying to fix it. And this is like now, again, 25, 30 years ago or something. Like this is a long ass time ago. And I only came up with one couplet in the moment, but I wish I had come up with more. Like I just kept like going and going and going. And so like, it's not a regret exactly, but like I find myself again, decades later thinking like, okay, I could have rhymed, robot with X, Y, and Z. Like I keep elaborating on this poem that I wanted to narrate and improvise. And it's not like a productive like sense of guilt or longing exactly, but it has stuck with me. Next time, if I have a robot blow up, I'm just going to keep rhyming, and that's just going to keep happening. But the maybe more like profoundly, I don't know, maybe more urgently, more personally, I think that same year, my team actually got disqualified. We were using a 1996 era MP3 player to simulate robotic speech, and so there was like certain behaviors that triggered certain robotic actions, and the MP3 player like gave the robot a voice to like be in dialogue with the characters in the play or whatever. And I don't remember what it was about the MP3 player that was illegal. I think this was before MP3 players were like understood to be like a technology that like existed. This is like before the iPod, before the Zune, right? And so like on one hand, like being disqualified for this thing was like it was painful. It was not we thought we'd come up with an effective human robot interface, and in a fashion we had, but like there was some kind of bylaw that we didn't understand and therefore got kicked out. But the deeper truth there is that like it didn't stop us from continuing this work and research. Like it didn't actually like the OM was the catalyst for this team coming together to experiment with like human robot interactions. In this case, like human robot danced interactions. Like we came up with this the MP3 kludge to address certain kinds of technical things or technical questions. But even though we lost the competition, I'm still thinking about human robot interaction. Like I'm still thinking about how humans robots can use dance specifically as an interface modality. It turned into like a research question that now literally animates my professorial career. I think what this is ultimately a lesson of for me is one of time scale. That it's possible to like lose in the short term, and like I want to acknowledge the feelingsfulness of that, while also understanding that like one can never be fully aware of the value or meaning of the moment in the moment. This is ultimately a lesson in patience in a certain respect.
I think it's a very good lesson because obviously when you have tournaments, you have winners and losers. Someone comes home with the trophy and someone does not come home with the trophy. But to limit the definition of success by saying whoever has the trophy is they've gotten all that can be gotten.
Totally.
But not realize that, there's impact that's, 20, 30 years down the line from, maybe an offhanded comment that a judge makes or an idea that you have in practice and say, oh, I'm not going to make this year, but maybe I'll make it 15 years down the road in my thesis
Totally.
for my PhD is really cool to think about. That, like you said, like impacts you have to think on a larger time scale.
And that's like definitionally challenging for a teenager. Like that's like you can't. It's like we're talking about a time scale that's multiples the lifespan, or not the lifespan, like the lived experience of these individuals at that moment. Like it's really hard and or maybe like optically like impossible. Nonetheless, like I think the lesson here is that like you don't know what success means yet. Like winning is not the sole parameter on what like a life well lived is or means.
Absolutely. So you're an educator and you work, as you said, in the intersection of choreography and technology. You make robots dance. So how do you go about teaching creativity? When someone says, I want to be creative, and maybe you have someone who defines themselves as a creative, but maybe they're not very creative, right? So
Sure.
how do you teach creativity?
That's a great and terrifying question. So I'm in addition to someone who came up through OM in the sense that like there are problems that have creative solutions, like this kind of model of like addressing problem sets through varying or various sort of means. I'm also like, so I'm a choreographer by training. And so what that means functionally is that my expertise is in making bodies move through space and time for meaning of various sorts. But I'm a specific kind of choreographer. I'm a choreographer trained in specific postmodern formalist techniques, which functionally means that like I'm particularly nerdy when it comes to like formal constructions, algorithmic constructions of bodies moving in performance. And so when I think about choreographic creativity, I'm not thinking about like kind of stereotypes of creative people. Like I'm not thinking about like what's that movie with the waiting for waiting for Guffman. I'm not thinking about like stereotypes of like what it means to be like flippant and creative and like sharp and like witty, like as a theatrical creator. I'm thinking about like what it means to create novel ways of addressing problem sets. Problem sets here can be understood mathematically, computationally, algorithmically, performatively, theatrically, dancerly. Like there's all sorts of ways that we can understand problem in the most, again, plural and interdisciplinary sort of matrix possible. But functionally, we were talking about addressing some kind of environment or situation that needs a response. A problem invites a response. And as an educator, I try to not adjudicate the nature or consistency of my students' responses to, for example, a problem set, either written or in studio, but rather to evidence the sheer panoply of options that are afforded students as they address any particular problem set. No, I should also specify that, like, as the person who's writing the problem sets, like I structure these problems in such a way to enable that kind of multiplicity. But when I talk about problem sets, what I'm specifically referring to are movement exercises. So in choreo robotics, for example, again, I'm not teaching like how to use Python to make the robots do things. I'm teaching how these students can think about bodies in space, and sometimes those bodies are human or not. And so to do that, to think through, for example, like safety protocols, like we have robots that have something like 42 different joints, and each one of those joints is capable of severing a finger. And so if you interact with these robots in an unhealthful way, if you don't abide by the problem set, there are serious corporeal consequences. Like there's stakes to this work here, and the problem, the parameters of the problem set are intended to introduce you to some of these necessary parameters, but also their consequences. So you can imagine a dance exercise without robots initially. That's all about like, okay, maintain 6 feet of distance from all of the other participants in the room. And so you can imagine like a certain kind of like stasis forms, like everybody gets equally distant enough from one another that like people stop moving, and then people have like the room has solved for this problem. Like everybody's roughly 6 feet away from each other. But then you add a single variable, like one person who is incentivized to be 3 feet away from people, whereas everybody else is told to be 6 feet away from people. And so we have one kind of rogue agent that is constantly adding flux to an otherwise stable system. And then you can continue adding variables and complexity to this movement exercise, which is all about like safety, which is all about like responding immediately to complexity and emergence. These are problem sets that are unsolvable in the sense that they never really end until I say they do. But how I measure and understand creativity then is a function of how individuals navigate this impossible situation. It's a Kobayashi Maru with dance and robots. That's a Star Trek reference that I'll put a footnote in for later. Ultimately, the thing that I'm thinking about or hoping to guide my students towards is not a solution, not to like solve the problem, but to address it as fully and with as much urgency and attention as possible. Because I'm not going to tell them whether their answers or responses are creative or not. They are either fulfilling the problem with attention and intention or not.
It's such an interesting description of a problem, similar to a long-term problem when you have, especially in problems 1 and 2, which are the vehicle problem, the technical problem. Very often there's distance guidelines. You have to be this far behind the lines, or these lines are this far from each other, or cross this line to get points, or don't cross this line to get points. And to have a similar exercise with have movement 6 feet away from each other, but then introduce this other variable is very similar. So I can see where you're getting your inspiration.
It's true.
I love it.
Great. Well, no, I mean, it's not a coincidence that I teach dance in that way. There is a postmodern tradition that is all about these kinds of parameters, but like to teach dance exercises in a rigorous science and technology environment where both of these things are privileged, like that's all OM.
I love it. I love how Odyssey of the Mind is impacting postmodern choreography and dance.
Yeah, absolutely. And robotic design. I mean, we literally have roboticists over here who are learning how to do human-robot interfaces by way of dance classes.
Yeah. What advice would you give someone who broadly wants to go into arts, let's say? So someone who wants to do dance or choreography or music or painting or anything that are broadly in this arts category, who might have found their home in Odyssey of the Mind, really loves the arts component, and then wants to pursue a larger career in arts.
Totally. this is such a colossally weird time to be an artist. Like it's never been like a particularly like normative, like easy time to be an artist, but like we're in a moment when uh, the ubiquity of cultural expression, the ubiquity of certain kinds of technologies means that like creative production, cultural production, performance, art, these are all phenomena that have like just so many more homes, so many more platforms. There's so much more possibility for young creatives and creators than there were 20, 30 years ago. I mean, it used to be like what you had like 7 television shows and like AOL like that. Now, granted, there's like lots of like drawbacks to living in a platform capitalist economy. Like there's lots of reasons to be really nervous about how some of these platforms work. So on one hand, a lot of my students who are dancers or visual artists like go off to work for Apple or Google because these are companies that recognize and incentivize the value of artists and creatives within their ranks. And so like the kind of argument that I heard a lot when I was growing up, which is like, oh, you'll never make a living as an artist. Like that canard, even if it was ever true, is definitely not true right now. There's lots of ways to be an artist. There's lots of ways to be paid for your time and expertise. The thing I would encourage sensitivity towards, first and maybe foremost, is community, affiliation, affinity, how you constellate your network, your friends, your chosen family. As an artist, it can be really challenging. It's not only challenging work, but it's really alienating and isolating sometimes. And so how you hold on to your community, how you hold on to your chosen family, it's not just like, there's not just personal consequences to that, there's professional consequences. The other thing I'll say is that like, I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, and a lot of the dance movies of that era are very, very poor. They're very, very bad. They're really fun to watch, but not take professional guidance from. So there's like, as a dancer, like there's all of this like mythologizing around like you suffer at the hands of the master choreographer for decades, and you get really tortured and hungry and physically and psychically abused. And then one day you've accrued enough mastery to like go become a real artist, and then you abuse future generations of artists because that's like the circle of life or something. So like this kind of mythology about like what it means to suffer as an artist, or to like come up through the ranks. Like there's all sorts of metaphors that speak to how real artists get made, right? And so for the folks who are coming up now, who are interested in being creative or being an artist for a living, I pay attention to those mythologies. I pay attention to those stories. I would ignore those mythologies and ignore those stories and blaze your own creative path, because we live in a time of tectonic disruption. The ways and means of previous generations do not hold true to you. This is a moment of extreme flux, and that gives me agita. That's really anxiety provoking on some level. But it means because things are so dislodged, that the kinds of careers that are possible now are wildly beyond anything I could ever imagine or advise. So go nuts, go blazingly towards your wildest dreams, and I think you'll probably be fine.
What a great response. It also doesn't hurt when big tech Fortune 500 companies are in the mix now for possible jobs for creative people.
Totally.
Not that they haven't always been, but I feel like we probably have gone through stages in history when
totally.
It is more or less easy for artists to get compensation from large businesses, and we're now at a period when it's especially if you can integrate tech in some way into your work, then you're in a good spot.
It's true. There is a cost though, right? So on one hand, there's all these opportunities at companies like Google and Facebook or whatever. But there is a deeper conversation about like the kinds of values that these institutions, these corporations have that may or may not be in relation to your values. So for example, I work a lot with military robots. They are robots designed for use in like warfighting and defensive environments. I'm a hardcore pacifist. My implication in this case, military industrial research as an artist is something that I'm very cognizant of. So the other side of this maybe is to be as an artist in dialogue with yourself about like how you understand your own value and like what a meaningful career is for you. Because if you don't articulate those terms for yourself, I guarantee that other people will set those terms for you.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Absolutely. Last question.
Yeah.
What's a book that you've loved in the last year?
Oh my God, so many books. This is a professional hazard as being a professor that I get to read books all day. It's awesome. My favorite book of the last year or so is called The Play in the System, The Art of Parasitical Resistance. And it's a book of aesthetic theory, notionally. But it's by Anna Watkins Fisher, who's brilliant and at the University of Michigan. What Fisher does is she says, like, look, we can't like turn off capitalism. We can't like turn off our implication in like military industrial technologies. We're all on the internet. We can't turn off Google. We can't stop using money. Like all of these kinds of like large scale structural things that feed certain kinds of inequities. We can't just like not participate. We can't just flick off the lights of capitalism, right? And if that's the case, then maybe there's empowerment that comes as a function of our implication. Like if we can't like say no to capitalism, like what can we do with our privilege, with the power, with the money that we have to affect the kinds of change that we want to see? So again, I think about this a lot, given my proximity to military industrial work and research. I'm very mindful of how my work as an artist is implicated within these larger structures. But also like as somebody within a university, and universities are not like neutral political institutions, right? Like I see it as my job to wield my positional privilege to open resources and possibilities for my students and people outside of the academy. So my job, as I understand it, yes, is to teach and whatever. But maybe more properly, it's to make opportunities available to those who otherwise wouldn't have the kinds of access or privilege that I benefit from. And so The Play in the System, it's a magisterial and frustrating read, but it's beautifully written. And for those of you with a knack for aesthetic relational theory, it's for you.
Those thousands of people out there.
There's literally dozens of people who buy academic books on aesthetic theory. It is a very accessible read on a certain level, but it's also like here too. It's like a book about capitalism that's also about art. Like it's not about like it's the objects of its analysis are performers. These are people who have really interesting and temperamental relationships with things like capital, like money. It's inspiring in that way, and I highly recommend it. It's super great.
Love it. Sydney, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Michael, my total pleasure. Let me know if I could ever be of use or support to the endeavor ever again.